The sound that drifted through the cottonwood trees that afternoon in late June of 1876 stopped Henry Rutherford dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively moving to the worn leather holster at his hip, before he realized what he was hearing was not a threat, but something that made his chest tighten in a way he could not explain. Henry had been riding for 3 days straight from Dodge City, Kansas, making his way through the unforgiving terrain of southeastern Colorado Territory, searching for stray cattle that had wandered from his employer's ranch near the Arkansas River. The heat had been merciless, and his canteen was running low when he heard it. A voice, clear as mountain water and twice as sweet, singing a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. He dismounted from his bay mare, Copper, and led her quietly through the dense brush toward the source of the song. The Arkansas River ran swift and cool here, fed by mountain runoff, and the banks were thick with willows and wild roses. As he pushed through the final curtain of green, Henry saw her. She stood ankle-deep in the rushing water, her back to him, wearing a simple cotton dress the color of faded sage. Her hair, dark as a raven's wing, hung loose down her back in waves that caught the late afternoon sunlight. She was washing clothes, laying them across the smooth river stones to dry, and as she worked, she sang. The language was not English, though some of the melody had the cadence of an old Irish ballad mixed with something else, something that reminded him of the Spanish songs he had heard in Santa Fe. Henry stood transfixed, forgetting entirely about the cattle, about his thirst, about everything except the sound of that voice. It carried a loneliness that matched something deep in his own soul, a longing for something he could not name. He must have made some sound, or perhaps Copper shifted behind him, because the woman suddenly stopped singing and spun around. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, wide and startled. She could not have been more than 20 years old, with a face that would have made poets weep. But what struck Henry most was the expression of pure terror that crossed her features when she saw him standing there. "Wait, please," Henry said quickly, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "I did not mean to frighten you. I heard singing and I thought perhaps there was a settlement nearby." The woman backed deeper into the water, her hands clutching the wet fabric she had been washing. She said nothing, but her eyes darted to the bank where a small leather satchel lay among the rocks. "I am not going to hurt you," Henry continued, keeping his voice low and steady, the way he would talk to a spooked horse. "My name is Henry Rutherford. I am a cattle hand from the Triple R Ranch about 20 miles east of here. I have been tracking strays for the better part of a week." Still she said nothing, but she stopped, backing away. Up close, Henry could see that her dress was worn and patched in several places, and there were dark circles under those remarkable eyes. She looked exhausted and more than a little wary. "You speak English?" Henry asked gently. For a long moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "What is your name?" Another pause, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was as lovely in speech as it had been in song, though heavily accented. "Teresa. Teresa Dalton." The surname surprised him. Dalton was Irish, but her accent carried traces of something else. Spanish, perhaps, or something even more exotic. "Miss Dalton, are you alone out here?" Teresa's jaw tightened, and she looked away from him, toward the water rushing past her legs. "That is not your concern." "I only ask because this is rough country," Henry said. "There are hostile bands roaming these parts, and worse, it is not safe for a woman alone. I can take care of myself." But even as she said it, her stomach gave an audible growl that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Henry made a decision. He walked slowly to Copper and retrieved his saddlebag, moving deliberately so as not to startle Teresa further. From the bag, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth containing jerky, hardtack, and a small wedge of cheese. He set it on a flat rock near the water's edge, along with his canteen. "I am going to water my horse downstream a bit," he said. "Please help yourself to the food. I have plenty." He led Copper away before Teresa could respond, giving her space but not going so far that he could not keep an eye on her. He had seen enough in his 32 years on the frontier to know when someone was running from something, and everything about Teresa Dalton screamed flight. As Copper drank from the river, Henry watched from the corner of his eye as Teresa emerged from the water. She approached the food cautiously, as if expecting a trap, then grabbed it and retreated to where her satchel lay. She ate with the desperate efficiency of someone who had not had a proper meal in days, trying to maintain dignity while clearly ravenous. When she had finished, she carefully rewrapped what was left and stood there, uncertain. Henry took that as his cue to approach again, though he kept a respectful distance. "How long have you been out here alone?" he asked. "3 days," Teresa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 4, I lost track. Where are you headed?" "Away." The single word carried a weight of pain and determination. Just away. Henry considered this. He should ride on, find those cattle, do his job. Getting involved in whatever trouble this woman was running from was not his concern. But he could not bring himself to leave her here, alone and vulnerable in country that showed no mercy to the unprepared. "There is a town about 15 miles south of here," he said. "Pueblo. It is small but growing. You might find work there, a safe place to stay." "I have no money for lodging," Teresa said flatly. "And I am not that kind of woman, so do not suggest it." "I was not suggesting anything of the sort," Henry replied, his tone sharper than he intended. "I was going to say that I know a widow there, Mrs. Crawford, who runs a boarding house and is always looking for help. She is a good woman and she would not ask too many questions." Teresa studied him for a long moment, those honey-colored eyes searching his face for deception. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "No, I do not," Henry agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone is desperate, and I know these lands do not forgive mistakes. If you stay out here alone much longer, you will die. It is as simple as that." The bluntness of his words seemed to cut through whatever resistance Teresa had been holding on to. Her shoulders sagged slightly and she nodded. "I would be grateful for the introduction to this Mrs. Crawford." "Can you ride?" Henry asked. "Yes." "Good, gather your things. We can reach Pueblo before nightfall if we leave now." As Teresa collected her damp laundry and stuffed it into her satchel, Henry noticed for the first time that she was not wearing shoes. Her feet were cut and bruised, wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been part of a petticoat. Whatever she was running from, she had left in a hurry and with almost nothing. He helped her mount Copper, then swung up behind her. Teresa stiffened at the proximity, but she did not protest. They rode in silence for the first hour, following the river south as it cut through the high plains. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You do not have to tell me," Henry said eventually, "but it might help if I know whether someone is going to come looking for you, whether I should expect trouble when we reach town." Teresa was quiet for so long that Henry thought she would not answer. Then, in a voice that shook slightly, she said, "My father sold me." The words hit Henry like a physical blow. "What?" "My father," Teresa repeated, her voice steadier now, as if saying it aloud had released something inside her. "He sold me to a man named Marcus Killian. Killian owns a saloon in La Junta and has business interests throughout the territory. He wanted a wife, someone young and someone who would not ask questions about his business. My father owed him money, a great deal of money from gambling debts, so they made an arrangement." "That is not legal," Henry said, anger heating his words. A man cannot sell his daughter like livestock. Perhaps not in the eyes of the law, Teresa said bitterly, but no law was going to help me. Killian has the sheriff in La Junta in his pocket, along with half the town council. My father told me I should be grateful, that Killian was a rich man and I would want for nothing. He did not care that Killian is 50 years old and has had 2 wives before me who both died under mysterious circumstances. Henry felt his jaw clench. He had heard of Marcus Killian, though he had never met the man. Killian's reputation extended throughout the territory as someone who got what he wanted through money, intimidation, and when those failed, violence. If Killian wanted Teresa back, he would send men to find her. Good men, bad men, it would not matter. Killian could afford the best. When was the wedding supposed to take place? Henry asked. 4 days ago, Teresa said. I ran the night before. I took one of my father's horses and rode until it went lame, then I continued on foot. I had a little money I had saved, but I lost it crossing a creek 2 days ago when I fell. The current took my shoes too. Since then, I have just been trying to stay near the river and move south. You should have gone north, Henry said, toward Denver or even farther into Wyoming territory. I thought of that, Teresa admitted. But Killian's business interests are all north of La Junta. I thought south might be safer, even if it meant going deeper into wilder country. It was not bad logic, Henry had to admit. If Killian is looking for you, he will check Pueblo eventually. It is the largest town south of La Junta for 100 miles. I know, Teresa said, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. But I need a few days to rest, to earn a little money, and then I will move on. Maybe to New Mexico territory, or west toward California. Somewhere far enough that Killian cannot reach me. They rode on as the sun sank lower, and Henry found his mind racing. The smart thing would be to take Teresa to Pueblo, introduce her to Mrs. Crawford, and then ride away. He had his own life, his own problems. He did not need to inherit hers. But even as he thought it, he knew he would not do that. Something about this woman had gotten under his skin, and it was not just her beauty or her voice, though both were considerable. It was the courage it must have taken to run, knowing what would happen if she was caught. It was the pride that kept her chin up even when she was starving and barefoot. It was something in her that called to something in him. They reached Pueblo just as the last light was fading from the sky. The town was indeed small, perhaps 200 souls all told, but it was growing thanks to the railroad that had come through 2 years prior. The main street was wide and lined with wooden buildings in various states of completion. A hotel stood at one end, a general store and bank at the other. Between them were a scattering of businesses. A blacksmith, a barber, 2 saloons, and several establishments Henry could not identify in the growing darkness. Mrs. Crawford's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure painted a cheerful yellow that stood out among the drabber buildings around it. Lights glowed warmly in several windows, and Henry could smell food cooking even from the street. His stomach rumbled, reminding him that he had given most of his provisions to Teresa and had not eaten since dawn. He dismounted and helped Teresa down, noticing how she winced when her wrapped feet touched the ground. "Wait here," he said, then climbed the steps to the front door and knocked. The woman who answered was in her late 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a practical dress covered by a flour-dusted apron, and her face lit up when she recognized Henry. "Henry Rutherford, as I live and breathe," she said warmly. "I have not seen you in a month of Sundays. Come in, come in." "Evening, Mrs. Crawford," Henry said, removing his hat. "I apologize for calling so late, but I was hoping you might have a room available and perhaps some work for a friend of mine." Mrs. Crawford's gaze shifted past Henry to where Teresa stood beside Copper, looking small and lost in the gathering darkness. "A friend, is she?" "She is in need of help," Henry said simply. "She is a good woman who has had some bad luck and needs a safe place to stay and a way to earn her keep." Mrs. Crawford studied Teresa for a long moment, and Henry could practically see her sharp mind cataloging every detail. The worn dress, the bandaged feet, the proud way Teresa held herself despite her circumstances. Whatever Mrs. Crawford saw must have satisfied her because she nodded briskly. "Bring her in," she said. "Any one friend of yours is welcome here, Henry, you know that. And Lord knows I could use the help. My hip has been bothering me something fierce, and the cooking and cleaning for 6 boarders is getting to be more than I can manage alone." Relief flooded through Henry. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. I will not forget this kindness." "Kindness nothing," Mrs. Crawford said with a dismissive wave. "If she can cook and clean, she will earn her keep. Now bring the poor girl inside before she falls over. She looks half-starved." Henry returned to Teresa and offered her his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, and he could feel her trembling slightly as they climbed the steps. Whether from exhaustion, relief, or fear, he could not tell. Mrs. Crawford ushered them into a warm, well-lit kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and stew. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, and copper pots hung from hooks on the walls. It was a space that spoke of comfort and care, and Henry saw some of the tension leave Teresa's shoulders as she took it in. "Sit, both of you," Mrs. Crawford commanded, pointing to the table. "You look like you have been through hell and back, and I will not discuss anything until you have hot food in your bellies." She bustled about, ladling thick beef stew into bowls and cutting generous slices of bread. She poured coffee for Henry and tea for Teresa, and only when they were both eating did she sit down across from them. "Now then," she said, folding her hands on the table. "I am Abigail Crawford, widow of John Crawford, who passed 5 years ago come autumn. I have run this boarding house for 3 years and pride myself on providing clean rooms, good food, and a respectable establishment. I do not tolerate drinking, gambling, or immoral behavior under my roof. Is that clear?" "Yes, madam," Teresa said quietly. "Good. What is your name, child?" "Teresa Dalton, madam." "And where are you from, Miss Dalton?" Teresa glanced at Henry, uncertainty flickering across her face. He gave a slight nod and she took a breath. "La Junta originally, but I am looking to make a fresh start somewhere new." Mrs. Crawford's eyes narrowed slightly. She was no fool, and she clearly knew there was more to the story. But to Henry's relief, she did not press. "Well, Miss Dalton, if you are willing to work hard, I can offer you room and board plus $2 a week. The work is not easy. You would be responsible for helping with all the cooking, cleaning the rooms, washing linens, and anything else I need done. The hours are long and some of my boarders can be particular. But you will be safe here and you will be treated fairly. Do we have an agreement?" "Yes, madam," Teresa said, and her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Thank you, madam, I will not disappoint you." "See that you do not," Mrs. Crawford said, but her tone was kind. She stood and beckoned for Teresa to follow. "Come along, then. Let me show you to your room and get you some proper footwear. We are close to the same size, I think, and I have more shoes than any woman needs." As Teresa followed Mrs. Crawford out of the kitchen, she glanced back at Henry. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Henry nodded, finishing his stew. He had done what he could. Teresa was safe, at least for now, and she had a chance to build a new life. It was more than many people got on the frontier. He should ride back to the ranch, report to his boss about the missing cattle, and forget about the woman with the beautiful voice and haunted eyes. But when Mrs. Crawford returned to the kitchen alone a few minutes later. Henry found himself saying, "How long can you keep her here before you need to tell anyone where she came from?" Mrs. Crawford sank back into her chair with a sigh. "So there is trouble following her, is there?" "Possibly," Henry admitted. "Probably. She ran away from a very bad situation involving a very dangerous man. If he comes looking for her, and he likely will, it could bring trouble to your door. I should have told you that before asking for your help." "Would it have changed what you did?" Mrs. Crawford asked shrewdly. "No," Henry said honestly. "But you deserve to know what you were getting into." Mrs. Crawford waved a dismissive hand. "I am an old woman, Henry. I have lived through Indian raids, drought, disease, and burying a husband I loved more than life itself. I am not afraid of trouble, especially not when it comes to helping a young woman who clearly needs it. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "I am not without resources. I have friends in this town, and several of my boarders are good men who would not stand by if someone tried to make trouble for me or mine." "Even so," Henry said, "you should be careful. The man she ran from is named Marcus Killian. He owns a saloon in La Junta and has a reputation for getting what he wants, one way or another." Mrs. Crawford's expression hardened. "I know the name. His reputation extends even here, and it is an ugly one. Well, if Marcus Killian thinks he can come into my house and take that girl by force, he will find himself sorely mistaken, but I appreciate the warning." Henry stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I should be going. Thank you for taking her in." "Where will you go now?" Mrs. Crawford asked. "Back to the Triple R, eventually," Henry said. "I still have those stray cattle to find, but I think I might stay in town tonight, get a room at the hotel. My boss will understand another day's delay, and I could use a proper bed and a bath." What he did not say, but what Mrs. Crawford clearly understood from the knowing look she gave him, was that he was not quite ready to leave Teresa yet. He wanted to make sure she was truly settled before he rode away. "The hotel is run by Stan Morrison," Mrs. Crawford said. "Tell him I sent you. He will give you a fair rate." Henry thanked her and headed out into the night. The temperature had dropped considerably, as it always did in the high country after sunset, and he could see his breath misting in the air. He led Copper to the livery stable, paid for her care, and then made his way to the hotel. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Henry woke to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere nearby. He dressed and made his way downstairs, intending to get breakfast at one of the saloons, but found his feet carrying him instead toward Mrs. Crawford's boarding house. Teresa answered his knock, and the transformation was remarkable. She wore a clean dress that fit her properly, borrowed from Mrs. Crawford he assumed, and her hair was braided neatly down her back. Her feet were clad in sturdy brown shoes, and though there were still dark circles under her eyes, she looked rested and more at peace than she had the previous evening. "Mr. Rutherford," she said, surprise and something else, something warm flickering across her face. "I did not expect to see you this morning. I wanted to check that you were settling in all right," Henry said, feeling suddenly awkward. "And to return your laundry. I took it off Copper last night and forgot to bring it in." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but Teresa smiled slightly. "That is very kind of you. Would you like to come in? Mrs. Crawford is making breakfast for the boarders, and there is plenty." Henry followed her into the dining room, where a long table was set for 8. 3 men were already seated, eating and talking in low voices. They looked up when Henry entered, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Henry Rutherford," Teresa said, her voice carrying a natural grace despite the informality of the situation. "He helped me find my way to Pueblo. Mr. Rutherford, these are some of Mrs. Crawford's boarders." The men nodded their greetings and introduced themselves. There was Samuel Pritchard, a middle-aged banker with kind eyes and graying temples. Next to him sat two younger men, brothers named Daniel and Lucas Marsh, who worked at the lumber mill on the edge of town. They all seemed decent enough, and Henry felt reassured that Teresa would be among people who would look out for her. Mrs. Crawford emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of eggs and bacon, Teresa following with a basket of fresh biscuits and a pot of coffee. They moved around the table with practiced efficiency, serving the men, and Henry noticed how Teresa's hands shook slightly when she poured his coffee. "Will you be staying in Pueblo long, Mr. Rutherford?" Samuel Pritchard asked politely as he buttered a biscuit. "Just another day or so," Henry replied. "I have business to attend to up north, but I wanted to make sure my horse was properly rested before moving on." It was not entirely true, but it was close enough. He did need to get back to searching for those cattle, but he found himself reluctant to leave just yet. Something about Teresa drew him, a pull he could not explain or resist. Over the next 3 days, Henry found reasons to stay in Pueblo. He told himself he was just being cautious, making sure no one from La Junta had followed Teresa's trail. He took odd jobs around town to pay for his hotel room and meals, helping the blacksmith reshoe horses, assisting at the lumber mill, even doing some carpentry work on a new building going up near the railroad depot. But the truth, which he finally admitted to himself on the 3rd evening as he sat on the porch of Mrs. Crawford's boarding house watching the sun set, was that he was staying because of Teresa. He was drawn to her in a way that went beyond simple attraction, though God knew she was beautiful enough to turn any man's head. It was something deeper, something that felt like recognition, as if he had been searching for her his whole life without knowing it. Teresa seemed to feel it too, though they had barely spoken beyond polite pleasantries. But Henry caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart race. She would bring him coffee when he sat on the porch in the evenings, and she would linger, asking him questions about his life, his work, his dreams. "Have you always been a cattle hand?" she asked on that 3rd evening, settling into the chair beside his with a cup of tea cradled in her hands. "Not always," Henry said. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri, but after the war I could not stay there anymore. Too many memories, too many ghosts. So I drifted west, tried my hand at various things. I worked on the railroad for a while, did some prospecting in the mountains, even spent a season as a buffalo hunter before realizing it was not for me. I have been working cattle for the past 5 years, and it suits me well enough." "Do you miss Missouri?" Teresa asked softly. "Sometimes," Henry admitted. "I miss how green everything was, how the land would smell after a spring rain. I miss my mother's cooking and the sound of church bells on Sunday morning, but I do not miss the memories. My parents died of influenza when I was 18, and most of my childhood friends did not come back from the war. There was nothing left for me there." "I am sorry," Teresa said, and he could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. "It must be hard to lose so much." "Everyone lost something in those years," Henry said with a shrug. "I am no different from thousands of others. What about you? What is your story, Teresa Dalton?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening street. "My mother was Mexican," she said finally. "From a good family in Santa Fe. My father was Irish, a merchant who came west to make his fortune. They met when he was trading in New Mexico territory and fell in love despite their family's objections. They married and moved to La Junta when my father's business expanded. I was born there, raised between two worlds. My mother taught me Spanish and the songs of her people. My father gave me his name and his stubbornness." "What happened to your mother?" Henry asked gently. "She died when I was 15, Teresa said, her voice tight with old grief. "Pneumonia." After she was gone, my father changed. He started drinking, gambling, making poor business decisions. Within 2 years, he had lost everything, including his self-respect. When Marcus Killian offered to clear his debts in exchange for me, my father saw it as a solution to all his problems. He did not care what it would cost me. "I am sorry," Henry said, echoing her earlier words. "No child should be betrayed by a parent that way." Teresa turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the house, her eyes gleamed with unshed tears. "Why are you still here, Henry? You have done more than enough for me. You owe me nothing, yet you stay." Why? It was a fair question, and Henry knew he owed her an honest answer. "Because," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I have spent the last 14 years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get close. I told myself it was because I preferred freedom, because I did not want to be tied down. But the truth is, I was just lonely and too stubborn to admit it. Then I heard you singing by the river, and something inside me woke up after being asleep for a very long time. I am not ready to walk away from that feeling yet. I am not ready to walk away from you." Teresa drew in a sharp breath, and a single tear traced down her cheek. "Henry, I cannot ask you to involve yourself in my troubles. If Killian finds me, and he will try, anyone associated with me will be in danger. You should go while you still can before you get hurt because of me." "I am a grown man, Teresa," Henry said firmly. "I have been taking care of myself for a long time, and I know the risks. I am not afraid of Marcus Killian or anyone else. What I am afraid of is riding away from here and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had stayed." "You barely know me," Teresa whispered. "Then let me know you better," Henry said. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Let me stay, at least for a while longer. Let us see where this leads." Teresa looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In her eyes, Henry could see fear warring with hope, caution battling with desire. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Stay." From that night on, things changed between them. It was nothing scandalous or improper. Mrs. Crawford would have never allowed that. But there was an understanding now, an acknowledgement of the connection that drew them together. Henry found work at the lumber mill, a more permanent position that paid decent wages. He moved out of the hotel and into a small room he rented from a widow on the edge of town. He made it clear that he was not just passing through anymore. He and Teresa spent what time they could together, always under the watchful and approving eye of Mrs. Crawford. They would walk along the river in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Teresa told him about her childhood, about her mother's songs and her father before grief and drink had changed him. She taught Henry a few words in Spanish and laughed at his clumsy pronunciation. In turn, Henry told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. He told her things he had never told anyone, about the war and what he had seen there, about the nightmares that sometimes still woke him in the dead of night. With Teresa, Henry felt like he could breathe fully for the first time in years. She understood loss and displacement in a way few others could. She knew what it was like to have your whole world turned upside down and to have to rebuild from nothing. They were two wounded souls finding healing in each other's presence. 3 weeks after Henry had first heard Teresa singing by the river, he realized he was in love with her. It happened in a moment so ordinary that he almost missed it. They were in Mrs. Crawford's kitchen, helping to prepare dinner for the boarders. Teresa was kneading bread dough, flour dusting her arms and a smudge of it on her cheek. She was humming softly to herself, that same melody he had first heard by the river, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window turned her hair to silk. Henry was supposed to be peeling potatoes, but he had stopped to watch her, struck by how right she looked in that moment, how perfect. And he understood with a clarity that left him breathless that he wanted this forever. He wanted to wake up every morning knowing she was near. He wanted to hear her sing, to see her smile, to hold her when the nightmares came. He wanted to build a life with her, a real life with a home and a future, and all the things he had stopped believing he could have. Teresa looked up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Do I have flour on my face?" "Yes," Henry said, setting down the potato and knife. He crossed the kitchen to her, reached out and gently brushed the flour from her cheek with his thumb. "Teresa, I need to tell you something." She went very still, her hands frozen in the dough. "What is it?" "I love you," Henry said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I love you. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Teresa's eyes widened, and for a moment Henry's heart plummeted. Had he misread everything? Had he moved too quickly? But then she smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face, and said, "I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid that if I admitted it, something would happen to take you away from me. But I love you, Henry Rutherford. I love you so much it scares me." Henry pulled her into his arms, heedless of the flour and dough, and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and it was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and tentative and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Mrs. Crawford's voice came from the doorway. "Well, it is about time you two figured that out," she said dryly, though her eyes were warm with approval. "I was beginning to think I would have to lock you in a room together before either of you worked up the courage to say something. But now that you have, perhaps you could finish getting dinner ready. The boarders will be expecting their meal on time, regardless of your romantic revelations." They laughed and returned to their respective tasks, but everything felt different now. The air seemed brighter, the future more possible. For the first time since running from La Junta, Teresa allowed herself to hope that she might actually be able to build a new life, a happy life, with a man she loved. But their peace was not destined to last. 2 days after Henry's confession, trouble arrived in Pueblo in the form of 3 hard-looking men who rode into town asking questions about a young Mexican woman who might have passed through a few weeks prior. Henry was at the lumber mill when he heard about it from Daniel Marsh, who had been at the general store when the men arrived. They were not friendly about it either, Daniel said, his young face creased with worry. They showed the storekeeper a photograph and told him there was a reward for information about her whereabouts. When he said he had not seen her, they got threatening, said they were hired by Marcus Killian and that anyone who got in their way would regret it. Henry's blood ran cold. Did they say where they were going next? They mentioned checking the boarding houses and the hotel, Daniel said. Henry, is Teresa in danger? Is she the woman they are looking for? There was no point in lying. Daniel was a good man, and he had become friends with both Henry and Teresa over the past weeks. "Yes," Henry said, "she is. I need to get to her before those men do. Can you cover for me here, of course?" Daniel said immediately. "Go, and Henry, if you need help you just have to ask. Lucas and I will stand with you." Henry clasped his shoulder in thanks, then took off running toward Mrs. Crawford's boarding house. His mind raced as he ran. He could try to hide Teresa, but in a town as small as Pueblo, there were only so many places to conceal someone. They could run, but Killian's men would be watching the roads. He could try to fight, but 3 armed men were bad odds, even for someone with his experience. He burst through the front door of the boarding house to find Mrs. Crawford and Teresa in the parlor, their faces pale. "They have already been here," Mrs. Crawford said before Henry could speak. 3 men, looking for a Mexican woman. I told them we had no one fitting that description, that all my staff were local women I had known for years. They did not believe me, but they had no proof, so they left. But Henry, they said they would be back with the sheriff to search the house. The sheriff will not help us, Henry said grimly. If Killian sent those men, he will have made it worth the sheriff's while to look the other way or even assist them. We need to get Teresa out of here, and we need to do it now. Where will we go? Teresa asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They will be watching the roads, and I cannot hide in Pueblo without putting Mrs. Crawford and everyone else in danger. I know a place, Henry said. It is a risk, but it might be our only option. There is an old trapper's cabin about 20 miles northwest of here, up in the mountains. It has been abandoned for years, but it is defensible and remote. We can hole up there while we figure out our next move. You mean while you figure out your next move, Teresa said sharply. Henry, I will not let you throw your life away to protect me. Maybe I should just turn myself in, go back to La Junta and marry Killian. At least then no one else would get hurt. Like hell you will, Henry said fiercely. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Teresa, I told you I love you and I meant it. I am not going to stand by and let you sacrifice yourself. We will find a way through this together, but you have to trust me. Do you trust me? Teresa searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. I trust you. Good. Then go pack whatever you need. We leave in 10 minutes. While Teresa hurried upstairs, Henry turned to Mrs. Crawford. I am sorry to bring this trouble to your door. Nonsense, Mrs. Crawford said briskly. You did the right thing, both in bringing her here and in loving her. Now you do what you need to do to keep her safe. And Henry, take this. She pressed a small derringer into his hand. It is not much, but it is better than nothing, and take these too. She handed him a bundle that clinked with the weight of canned goods and other supplies. I packed this while you and Teresa were talking. I figured you would need provisions. Henry hugged her, something he had never done before. Thank you, Abigail, for everything. Just come back safe, both of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And when this is all over, you bring that girl back here so I can help plan the wedding. I have always wanted to organize a proper wedding. Teresa came back downstairs with her small satchel, wearing the practical riding clothes Mrs. Crawford had given her weeks ago. She hugged Mrs. Crawford goodbye, both women crying, and then she and Henry slipped out the back door into the alley. They made their way carefully to the livery stable, avoiding the main street. Henry's horse copper was there, along with a sturdy roan mare that Teresa could ride. Henry quickly saddled both horses, paid the startled stable hand double to keep his mouth shut about seeing them, and then they were riding hard out of Pueblo, heading northwest toward the mountains. They rode for hours, pushing the horses as fast as they dared on the rough terrain. Henry kept glancing back over his shoulder, expecting at any moment to see pursuit, but the trail behind them remained empty. As the sun began to set, they finally reached the narrow path that led up into the foothills toward the cabin Henry remembered. The cabin was exactly as he recalled it, small, rough, but solid. It had been built by a trapper named Old Pete who had lived there for decades before dying one winter of pneumonia. The local hunters and trappers used it occasionally as a way station, and there was usually a small store of firewood and basic supplies left for emergencies. Henry helped Teresa dismount and led her inside while he took care of the horses. The interior was musty from disuse but dry and reasonably clean. There was a fireplace, a rough table and 2 chairs, and a bed frame in the corner with a thin mattress that had seen better days. It was not much, but it would do. By the time Henry returned from tending the horses, Teresa had started a fire and was unpacking the supplies Mrs. Crawford had given them. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her face drawn with stress, but she gave him a brave smile when he entered. "It is not much like a castle," she said, "but it will keep us safe." "It will do more than that," Henry said, pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest. He could feel her trembling and held her tighter. "We are going to be all right, Teresa, I promise you." "You cannot promise that," she whispered. "Killian is not going to give up. He will keep looking for me, and when he finds us, and he will find us eventually, what then? You cannot fight all his men. No one can." "Then we will not fight them," Henry said. He had been thinking about this during the ride, turning possibilities over in his mind. "We will make it so Killian does not want to fight. We will take away his reason for coming after you." Teresa pulled back to look up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Killian wants you because he made a deal with your father," Henry said. "In his mind, and probably in the eyes of whatever corrupt officials he has in his pocket, he has a legal claim to you. But what if you were already married to someone else? What if you became my wife, Teresa? Killian could not claim you then, not without starting a legal battle he could not be sure of winning, especially if we took our marriage certificate to the territorial governor in Denver." Teresa stared at him. "Henry, are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes," Henry said firmly. "I know this is not how either of us imagined a proposal, and I do not have a ring to give you. But I meant what I said before. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. If you will have me, I will do everything in my power to make you happy and keep you safe." Tears spilled down Teresa's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Henry Rutherford. Today, tomorrow, whenever you say, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with a kiss. And despite the danger they were in, despite the uncertain future they faced, Henry felt a surge of pure joy. This woman, this brave, beautiful, amazing woman, had agreed to be his wife. The next morning, they rode back down from the mountains, but not toward Pueblo. Instead, they headed west toward a tiny settlement Henry knew of called Red Rock, barely more than a few houses and a trading post. But Henry knew that the traveling Methodist circuit preacher, a man named Reverend Thomas Hall, was scheduled to be there, as he made his rounds through the remote settlements once a month. They found Reverend Hall at the trading post, a tall, thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. When Henry explained their situation, leaving out most of the details about Killian but making it clear that they needed to be married immediately, the Reverend agreed without hesitation. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Reverend Hall said, "and if you two young people love each other and are of age and sound mind, then I see no reason to delay. Do you have witnesses?" The trading post owner, a gruff but good-hearted man named Jack Thompson, agreed to stand as one witness, and his wife Martha served as the other. And so, on a bright morning in late July of 1876, in a rough trading post in the middle of nowhere, Henry Rutherford and Teresa Dalton were married. There were no flowers, no fancy clothes, no crowd of well-wishers. But there was love, genuine and deep and true, and there were words spoken before God and witnesses that bound them together. When Reverend Hall pronounced them husband and wife, and Henry kissed his bride, he knew that whatever happened next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. They stayed at the trading post that night in a small but clean room upstairs. For the first time, they were truly alone together, married and free to express their love without reservation. Henry was gentle with Teresa, mindful that this was new for both of them in some ways. They took their time, learning each other, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a sense of rightness that transcended the physical act. This was a joining of souls, a completion that both had been searching for without knowing it. In the aftermath, Lying in each other's arms as moonlight streamed through the small window, Teresa said softly, "I never thought I could be this happy. After everything that happened, I thought joy was something I would never feel again. But you have given that back to me, Henry. You have given me hope and love and a future worth living. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." "You do not need to thank me," Henry murmured, kissing her forehead. "You have given me just as much. Before I found you by that river, I was just existing, not really living. You changed that. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting. You made me believe in tomorrow again." They stayed at the trading post for 3 more days, partly to rest and partly to let any pursuit from Pueblo move past them. Jack Thompson proved to be a valuable source of information, as trappers and traders passed through regularly with news from all over the territory. It was from one such trader that they learned Marcus Killian's men had indeed torn Pueblo apart looking for Teresa before moving on, apparently believing she had headed toward Santa Fe. "That buys us some time," Henry said, as he and Teresa discussed their options on the morning of the 4th day. "We need to get to Denver and file our marriage certificate with the Territorial Records Office. Once that is done, Killian's claim on you becomes much weaker. Even a corrupt sheriff would have a hard time ignoring a legal marriage." "And then what?" Teresa asked. "Even if the law sides with us, Killian is not the type of man who lets go easily. He might try to hurt us in other ways, or just come after us directly without bothering with legal niceties. Then we make sure we are not easy targets," Henry said. "Denver is a big city and it is growing bigger every year. We can lose ourselves there, build a new life where Killian cannot easily reach us. I have some money saved and I am good with my hands. I can find work. We can start fresh." Teresa nodded slowly. "All right, Denver it is. But Henry, I do not want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. At some point we need to face this head-on and end it." "I know," Henry agreed, "and we will when the time is right. But for now, let us focus on getting somewhere safe and building the foundation of our life together. The rest will come." They said goodbye to the Thompsons, who had been kind and welcoming despite knowing almost nothing about them, and set out for Denver. The journey took them 6 days, following rough trails through increasingly populated territory. As they traveled, Henry noticed that Teresa seemed to relax more with each mile they put between themselves and La Junta. She sang sometimes as they rode, teaching Henry the songs her mother had taught her. Her voice, which had first drawn him to her, became the soundtrack of their journey. Denver was a revelation after the small towns and settlements they had been living in. With a population approaching 5,000 souls, it was a bustling, growing city where the old rough and tumble frontier was giving way to civilization and commerce. There were brick buildings, paved streets in some areas, and even street lamps. It was a place where 2 people could disappear into the crowd and start over. Henry found them lodgings in a respectable boarding house run by a German couple, the Schneiders. It was not as nice as Mrs. Crawford's place, but it was clean and safe. He then went to the territorial offices and filed their marriage certificate, making sure it was properly recorded and official. With that done, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Teresa was legally his wife now, in the eyes of both God and territorial law. Killian could not touch her without starting a legal battle he might not win. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Henry's life. He found work as a carpenter with a construction company that was building new houses on the outskirts of Denver. The pay was good, and the work was steady. Teresa found employment at a dress shop, using sewing skills her mother had taught her. They saved every penny they could, planning for the day when they could afford their own small house. They were building a life together, a real life with routines and plans and dreams for the future. They would walk home together in the evenings, hand in hand, and talk about what they wanted. Henry dreamed of having his own carpentry business someday. Teresa talked about opening a small restaurant where she could serve the Mexican food her mother had taught her to make. They both wanted children, a whole houseful if God was willing, but their peace was shattered one evening in late September when Henry returned to their boarding house to find Teresa white-faced and shaking. "He found me," she said as soon as Henry entered their room. "Or rather, his men found me. Two of them came into the dress shop today asking questions. They did not recognize me at first because I was in the back, but I heard them describing me to my employer. They showed her a photograph. Henry, they are still looking for me, and they are here in Denver." Henry felt cold fury wash over him. "Did they see you?" "No, I stayed hidden until they left, but they will be back. My employer told them she had not seen anyone matching my description, but I do not think they believed her." "Then we need to leave Denver," Henry said, his mind already racing ahead. "Tonight, if possible. We can head north to Cheyenne or west to the mining towns, anywhere but here." "No," Teresa said firmly. "No more running. You were right when you said we cannot spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. It is time to end this, Henry. It is time to face Marcus Killian directly." "Teresa, that is too dangerous," Henry protested. "We do not know how many men he has or what he is capable of." "We know he is capable of buying lawmen and threatening innocent people," Teresa said, her voice hardening. "We know he is capable of treating women like property. What we do not know is whether he is capable of listening to reason. Maybe if I speak to him directly, show him our marriage certificate, explain that I will never willingly go with him, he will accept that it is over." "And if he does not?" Henry asked. "Then we will deal with that when it happens," Teresa said. "But I have to try. I have to look him in the eye and tell him that I am not his to claim, that I never was. I need that closure, Henry. I need to stop being a victim and start being a woman who fought for her own life." Henry wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in their room and guard the door until Killian and his men left Denver. But he understood what she was saying. He had spent 14 years running from his own demons, and it was only when he stopped and faced them that he had been able to build a real life. Teresa needed the same closure, the same chance to stand up for herself. "All right," he said finally. "We will try it your way, but we do this smart. We meet him in a public place, somewhere with witnesses, and we bring backup. I am not taking any chances with your safety." Over the next 2 days, Henry reached out to people he had met in Denver, men he had worked with or shared a drink with, men who seemed decent and trustworthy. He was surprised and touched by how many agreed to help. There was James Porter, the foreman at the construction company, a broad-shouldered Irishman who had taken a liking to Henry. There were 2 brothers, Frank and William Cooper, who worked as freight haulers and had become friends with Henry at a local saloon. Even Mr. Schneider, their landlord, offered his assistance, though Henry convinced him he would be more useful staying with his wife and making sure Teresa had a safe place to return to. Henry also sent a telegram to Mrs. Crawford in Pueblo, letting her know what was happening. Her reply came back the same day. "Be careful. Be brave. Come back whole. I am praying for you both." The meeting was arranged through a carefully worded message left at the hotel where Killian's men were staying. Henry proposed meeting at the Golden Palace Saloon at noon on a Tuesday. The Golden Palace was a well-known establishment that attracted a mixed clientele of businessmen, miners, and cowboys. More importantly, the owner was an old Army friend of James Porter's and had agreed to have several of his staff on alert during the meeting. Henry and Teresa arrived at the Golden Palace 15 minutes early. James, Frank, and William were already there, positioned at strategic points around the room. They were not looking for a fight, but if one came, they would be ready. Marcus Killian arrived exactly at noon, and Henry felt Teresa stiffen beside him when the man entered. Killian was in his early 50s, tall and distinguished-looking, with silver shot through his dark hair and expensive clothes that spoke of wealth. He carried himself with the confidence of a man used to getting his way, and his eyes, when they landed on Teresa, were cold and calculating. He was accompanied by two men, hard cases with the look of professional enforcers. They flanked Killian as he crossed the saloon to the table where Henry and Teresa waited. "Miss Dalton," Killian said smoothly, ignoring Henry entirely. "You have led me on quite a chase. I hope you realize the trouble you have caused. It is Mrs. Rutherford now," Teresa said, her voice steady though Henry could feel her trembling slightly where their arms touched. "And I did not ask you to chase me. I made it clear before I left La Junta that I would never marry you." Killian's expression darkened slightly, but he kept his tone pleasant. "You were overwrought, understandably nervous about the wedding. Your father assured me it was nothing but pre-wedding jitters. If you had simply stayed and talked to me, we could have worked through your concerns." "There was nothing to work through," Teresa said firmly. "I did not want to marry you, Mr. Killian. I still do not want anything to do with you. I am married now to a good man who loves me and treats me with respect. It is over. Please accept that and leave us in peace." "I am afraid it is not that simple," Killian said, and now his pleasant facade slipped a bit. "I paid your father a considerable sum of money for your hand in marriage. We had a contract, a legal agreement. You cannot simply walk away from that." "Actually, she can," Henry said, speaking for the first time. He pulled out their marriage certificate and laid it on the table. "Teresa is my wife, legally married in Red Rock and registered with the territorial government in Denver. Whatever agreement you had with her father is void. She is not his property to sell, and she is certainly not yours to claim." Killian barely glanced at the certificate. "I do not care about a piece of paper," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "I paid good money, and I will have what I paid for. Miss Dalton is coming back to La Junta with me, one way or another." "I am not going anywhere with you," Teresa said, her voice rising. Several patrons in the saloon turned to look at them. "I would rather die than be your wife." "That can be arranged," Killian said coldly. His hand moved toward his jacket, but before he could draw whatever weapon he carried, there was a distinctive click of several hammers being pulled back. James, Frank, and William all had their guns out and pointed at Killian and his men. Even the bartender had produced a shotgun from under the bar. "I think you should leave now, Mr. Killian," Henry said quietly. "You are outgunned and outmaneuvered. Teresa is my wife. She is not going with you. If you try to take her by force or if you harm her in any way, I will not rest until you face justice. And I am not talking about the corrupt lawmen you have in your pocket in La Junta. I am talking about federal marshals and territorial governors. Push this, and I will make sure your whole dirty operation comes under scrutiny." For a long moment, Killian stared at Henry, and the hatred in his eyes was palpable. Then he looked at Teresa, and something shifted in his expression. "I see," he said slowly. "So you chose a penniless cowboy over me. You chose poverty and struggle over everything I could have given you." "I chose love," Teresa said simply. "I chose freedom. I chose a man who sees me as a person, not property. That is worth more than all the money in the world." Killian laughed, but it was a bitter, ugly sound. "Love," he spat. "Love does not put food on the table or keep the wolves at bay. You will regret this choice, Miss Dalton. Mark my words. Within a year you will be crawling back, begging for the life you threw away." "No, I will not," Teresa said with absolute certainty, "because I know now what real happiness feels like. And I will never settle for less, no matter what the future holds." Killian stared at her for another moment, then turned abruptly and stalked out of the saloon, his men following close behind. Everyone in the room remained tense until the three men had mounted their horses and ridden away. Only then did Henry's friends lower their weapons. "You think that is the end of it?" James asked, joining them at the table. "Honestly, I do not know," Henry said, "but we made our point. Killian knows now that Teresa is not alone, that she has people willing to stand up for her. And he knows that taking her by force would bring more trouble than it is worth. Men like Killian are ultimately pragmatic. If the cost outweighs the benefit, they move on to easier targets." "I hope you are right," Teresa said softly. She was pale but composed, and Henry could see the relief in her eyes. She had faced her demon and lived to tell the tale. "Thank you, all of you, for standing with us today. We will not forget this kindness." "That is what friends are for," James said with a smile. "Now, I think we all deserve a drink. Henry, the first round is on you." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the Golden Palace, celebrating their victory and toasting to new beginnings. Henry kept a protective arm around Teresa, and she leaned into him, finally allowing herself to relax. The weight that had been pressing down on both of them for weeks had lifted. They were free over the next few months. Henry and Teresa settled fully into their life in Denver. They moved out of the boarding house and into a small rented house of their own, nothing fancy but theirs. Teresa stopped working at the dress shop and focused on setting up their home, and Henry's carpentry business began to grow as word spread about his skill and reliability. By the time winter arrived, they were secure enough financially that they began to talk seriously about starting a family. "I want children with you," Teresa told him one snowy evening as they sat by the fire in their small parlor. "I want to fill this house with laughter and love. I want to give our children the childhood I lost, the security and happiness that every child deserves." "Then we will," Henry said, pulling her close. "We will have as many children as God sees fit to bless us with, and we will love them with everything we have." Their first child, a son they named William after Henry's father, was born in late September of 1877, just over a year after their confrontation with Marcus Killian. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes, and he was perfect in every way that mattered. Henry held his son for the first time and felt something in his chest crack open, a well of love so deep it terrified him. This tiny, fragile life depended on him, trusted him, and Henry swore silently that he would never let this boy down. Teresa was a natural mother, patient and loving and fiercely protective. She sang to William constantly, the same songs her mother had sung to her, and Henry would often find her just watching their son sleep, tears of joy on her cheeks. They had survived so much to reach this moment, and every second of happiness felt earned and precious. Life was not always easy. Henry's business went through slow periods, especially in winter when construction slowed. Teresa sometimes had nightmares about Killian finding them, though those became less frequent as time passed. They struggled with the normal challenges of young parenthood: sleepless nights, childhood illnesses, the constant worry that they were doing everything wrong. But they faced it all together, and their love only grew deeper with each shared challenge and triumph. 2 years after William's birth, Teresa gave birth to twin daughters, Alina and Rose. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so. For several hours, Henry had paced the waiting room of the doctor's office, terrified that he would lose Teresa, that the happiness they had built would be ripped away. When the doctor finally emerged to tell him that Teresa was weak but stable, and that he had 2 healthy daughters, Henry had actually wept with relief. Their little house became even smaller with 5 people in it, and Henry started working longer hours to save money for a larger home. He had built up a loyal clientele and had even taken on 2 apprentices, young men eager to learn the carpentry trade. His dream of owning his own business had become a reality, and the Rutherford Carpentry Company was gaining a reputation as the best in Denver for quality work at fair prices. On a crisp autumn evening in 1882, 6 years after Henry had first heard Teresa singing by the river, they finally moved into their own house. It was not a mansion, but it was spacious and sturdy, with 4 bedrooms, a real parlor, and a kitchen that made Teresa cry with happiness. Henry had built much of it himself with help from his apprentices, pouring his love for his family into every beam and board. "You remember that terrible cabin in the mountains where we hid from Killian's men?" Teresa asked as they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching their 3 children play in the yard. William, now 5 years old, was teaching his 2-year-old sisters how to catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I remember," Henry said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I remember being terrified that I would fail to keep you safe, that everything would fall apart. But it did not," Teresa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We survived. We built this life together, piece by piece. Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky we are." "It was not luck," Henry said firmly. "It was courage, yours and mine. It was love and determination and refusing to give up even when things looked impossible. We earned this happiness, Teresa. Never forget that." She turned to kiss him, a soft kiss full of affection and promise. "I love you, Henry Rutherford. I will love you until my dying day and beyond." "And I love you," Henry replied. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start living. You gave me a family and a home and a future. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and their children's laughter rang out across the yard, Henry reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A song by a river, a woman in need, a series of choices that could have gone so differently. But fate, or God, or simple luck had brought them together, and they had held on through every storm. Life continued to unfold for the Rutherford family. In 1884, Teresa gave birth to another son, Samuel, and their house rang with the noise and chaos of 4 active children. Henry's business continued to thrive, and he was able to hire more workers and take on larger projects. They were not wealthy, not by the standards of Denver's growing upper class, but they were comfortable and secure, and that was more than enough. They heard, through various channels, that Marcus Killian had died in 1883, shot by a disgruntled business associate in a dispute over money. The news brought a sense of closure to Teresa, the final severing of the last tie to her past. She mourned not for Killian himself, but for the young woman she had been when she fled La Junta, the frightened girl who had not known if she would survive another day. That girl was gone, replaced by a strong woman, a loving wife, and a devoted mother. Mrs. Abigail Crawford came to visit them in 1885, making the journey from Pueblo to Denver by train. She was older and moved more slowly, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and she delighted in meeting the children and seeing the life Henry and Teresa had built. "I told you I wanted to help plan a wedding," she said with a laugh during her visit. "But I suppose I arrived too late for that. Perhaps I will have to wait for these children to grow up and find love of their own." "You will always have a place in our home," Teresa told her, hugging the older woman tightly. "You saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn. I will never forget that kindness." "And you gave an old woman hope," Mrs. Crawford replied. "Seeing you 2 young people find each other and build such a beautiful life reminded me that love is always worth fighting for, no matter the obstacles. You did me as much good as I did you." The children loved Mrs. Crawford, and William especially was fascinated by her stories of the early days in Pueblo, when it was barely more than a few buildings and a dream. She stayed for a month, and when she left to return to Pueblo, it was with promises to visit again soon and a standing invitation for the Rutherford family to come see her. As the years passed, Henry and Teresa's children grew. William showed an early aptitude for carpentry and would spend hours in Henry's workshop, learning the trade. The twins, Elena and Rose, were opposite in temperament but inseparable. Elena was quiet and bookish, always with her nose in a book borrowed from Denver's new public library. Rose was outgoing and adventurous, with a love of horses that rivaled her father's. Samuel, the youngest, was the family jokester, always making them laugh with his antics and observations. Teresa never lost her love of singing. She would sing while she cooked, while she cleaned, while she tended the small garden behind their house. And on special occasions, she would sing for her family, those old songs her mother had taught her, and the newer ones she had learned over the years. Her voice was as beautiful as ever, and it never failed to move Henry, reminding him of that first afternoon by the river when her song had changed his life forever. In 1890, when William was 13 and beginning to talk about learning a trade seriously, Henry decided it was time to tell his son the full story of how he and Teresa had met. They were in the workshop together, Henry teaching William how to properly join two beams, when he began to speak. "Son, there is something your mother and I have never fully explained to you and your siblings about our past. You are old enough now to understand, and I think it is important you know where you came from." William looked up from his work, curious. "What is it, Pa?" And so Henry told him. He told him about hearing Teresa singing by the river, about her flight from Marcus Killian, about the danger they had faced and the choices they had made. He told him about the people who had helped them, the friends who had stood by them when things got tough. He told him everything, holding nothing back. When he finished, William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ma was very brave." "Yes, she was," Henry agreed. "She still is. Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known. She lost everything and rebuilt her life from nothing. She faced down her fears and came out the other side even stronger. I hope you and your siblings inherit that strength." "I hope so too," William said seriously. Then, with the earnestness of youth, he added, "Pa, if I ever find someone I love the way you love Ma, I will fight for her too. I will do whatever it takes to keep her safe and happy." Henry clasped his son's shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "That is all any father could hope to hear, son. That is all any father could hope to hear." That evening, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, and Teresa noticed that William was watching her with a new awareness, a deeper appreciation. When she asked him about it, he simply said, "I am glad you are my mother." Teresa's eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "And I am so grateful to be your mother, William. You and your sisters and brother are my greatest treasures. I would face down 100 Marcus Killians to keep you all safe." The children were confused by the reference, so Teresa and Henry ended up telling them all the full story that night. The twins and Samuel listened with wide eyes, asking questions and expressing amazement at the adventures their parents had survived. It brought the family even closer together, this shared understanding of where they had come from and what they had overcome. As Denver continued to grow and modernize around them, the Rutherford family remained a constant, a testament to the enduring power of love and determination. Henry's business expanded, and he eventually opened a second location on the other side of the city. Teresa started teaching music lessons from their home, passing on her mother's songs to a new generation. Their children thrived, each finding their own path in the world. In 1894, Mrs. Abigail Crawford passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Henry and Teresa made the journey to Pueblo for her funeral, bringing all 4 children with them. They wept for the woman who had given Teresa a second chance and who had believed in their love when everything seemed hopeless. They also celebrated her life, sharing stories of her kindness and her sharp wit with the many other people whose lives she had touched. Standing at Mrs. Crawford's grave, Teresa said quietly to Henry, "I hope she knew how much she meant to us. I hope she understood that our entire life, everything we built, started with her kindness that day." "She knew," Henry assured her. "I told her every time we visited. And I think she was proud of what we accomplished, proud that her faith in us was justified." Life continued its steady march forward. William married at 20, a kind young woman named Sarah who shared his love of craftsmanship. They gave Henry and Teresa their first grandchildren, twin boys who reminded everyone of how Alina and Rose had been as toddlers. Loud, energetic, and full of mischief. Alina became a teacher, dedicated to educating Denver's growing population of children. Rose married a rancher and moved to the western slope of Colorado, where she could indulge her love of horses and wide open spaces. Samuel followed his father into the carpentry business, showing even more natural talent than William. As the 19th century drew to a close and a new century dawned, Henry and Teresa found themselves in their middle years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, blessed beyond measure. They still lived in the house Henry had built, though they had expanded and improved it over the years. They still loved each other with the fierce devotion that had marked their relationship from the beginning. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1901, their children threw them a party. The house was full of people. Their 4 children and their spouses, 7 grandchildren ranging from infancy to 10 years old, friends from church and the business community, neighbors who had become like family over the years. There was food and music and laughter, and when Teresa sang, as everyone begged her to do, there was not a dry eye in the house. Later, when the guests had gone home and they were alone, Henry and Teresa stood together on the porch of their home, just as they had so many times over the years. The city lights of Denver twinkled in the distance, a far cry from the rough frontier town it had been when they first arrived. "You ever regret it?" Henry asked quietly. "The path we took, the choices we made, the struggles we went through." Teresa looked up at him, and in the moonlight, she looked almost as young as she had that day by the river 25 years ago. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear or doubt brought us here to this life, to this family. How could I regret any of it when it gave me everything I ever dreamed of and more?" "I feel the same," Henry said, pulling her close. "That day I heard you singing by the river was the day my real life began. Everything before was just marking time until I found you." They stood there in comfortable silence, 2 people who had weathered storms together and come out stronger on the other side. They had built a life, a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would tell their children the story of the cowboy who heard a woman singing by the river and followed that voice to an unbelievable discovery. That love, true love, was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any challenge. And that when 2 people committed to each other completely, there was nothing they could not overcome together. In 1910, Henry and Teresa celebrated their 30th anniversary with a quiet family dinner. They were grandparents many times over now, and there were hints that William's oldest was getting serious with a young woman from church. The cycle continued. generation following generation, each building on the foundation laid by those who came before. Henry had slowed down in recent years, letting his sons run the carpentry business while he took on an advisory role. Teresa's voice was not quite as strong as it had once been, but it was still beautiful, still capable of moving listeners to tears. They spent more time at home, tending their garden, playing with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. "We should write it all down," Teresa said one evening as they sat together on the porch swing Henry had built years ago. "Our story, I mean. So the grandchildren and great-grandchildren will know. So they will understand what love really means and what people are capable of when they refuse to give up." "That is a fine idea," Henry agreed. "Though I am not much of a writer, perhaps we could ask Alina to help us." She always had a way with words. And so they did. Over the next year, with Alina's help, Henry and Teresa told their story. They started with that day by the river and continued through all the years that followed, holding nothing back. They talked about the fear and the courage, the love and the sacrifice, the joy and the sorrow. They talked about the people who had helped them and the lessons they had learned. And when it was finished, when their story was written down in Alina's neat handwriting and bound in a simple leather book, they felt a sense of completion. "Whatever happens now," Teresa said as she held the finished book, "our story will survive. Our children and their children will know that love is worth fighting for. They will know that even when things seem darkest, there is always hope." Henry and Teresa lived to see their 40th anniversary in 1916. By then, they had 14 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. They had seen the automobile replace the horse and buggy, had watched electricity come to their neighborhood, had witnessed the world change in ways they never could have imagined when they first met. But through all those changes, their love had remained constant, an anchor in a shifting world. Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1918, just shy of their 42nd anniversary. He was 74 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Teresa was devastated by his loss, but she took comfort in knowing that they had had 42 years together, 4 decades of love and partnership that many people never experienced. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, always ready with a story or a song. She passed away in 1923, and her family buried her next to Henry in Denver's Riverside Cemetery, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, "Henry and Teresa Rutherford, together in life, together in death." Their love was an unbelievable discovery. The leather-bound book Alina had helped them write became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations. Their descendants would gather on anniversaries and special occasions to read from it, to remember the courage and love that had founded their family. The story of the cowboy who heard a woman singing by the river became part of family lore, told and retold, always ending with the reminder that true love, the kind that lasts a lifetime, is worth any price. And sometimes, on quiet evenings in Colorado, when the wind blows just right through the cottonwoods along the Arkansas River, people swear they can hear the faint sound of a woman singing, her voice clear and beautiful, a testament to a love that transcended time and circumstance. It is just a legend, of course, a romantic story told by locals to visitors. But the descendants of Henry and Teresa Rutherford know better. They know that some loves are so powerful, so true that they leave an echo in the world long after the lovers themselves have gone. And they know that the greatest discoveries in life are not gold or land or fortune, but the discovery of another soul that perfectly matches your own, and the courage to build a life together no matter what obstacles stand in the way.